Welcome back. Today, we're diving into feedback from multiple FDA other action letters. Think complete response letters, refuse to file decisions across NDAs and BLAs, highlighting some common high stakes problems. Let's jump right in with maybe the biggest hurdle proving actual clinical benefit. A key theme I saw running through these letters is this real challenge, isn't it? Taking data that looks statistically significant and making it count as substantial evidence of effectiveness that, actually matters to patients and regulators.
That really is the heart of it. The weakness often isn't like a complete lack of a signal. It's more that the signal is weak, or maybe the study design muddies the waters, or there's just too much negative data hanging around.
Right.
And maybe there's a failure sometimes to anticipate just how high the bar is now for showing meaningfulness, especially if there are already decent treatments out there. That makes it a costly strategic mistake.
Okay, let's look at an example. NDA 21164, Gepirone ER. What went wrong there?
Well, with Gepirone, the core issue was just overwhelming weakness, really. They leaned on two short-term studies, but crucially, these used two different drug formulations.
Ah, okay.
And when you add in the background noise, this preponderance of negative studies for that drug class already, well, the fragmented evidence just wasn't convincing. It couldn't overcome that history.
And then you have cases where, okay, you can measure an effect, but is it big enough to matter? Like NDA 213931 for tenapanor.
Exactly. Tanapanor did show it could lower serum phosphorus, but the effect size, it was pretty small, a 0.65 milligrams per deciliter reduction, and the FDA explicitly called that out as being of unclear clinical significance.
So statistically significant maybe, but clinically?
Clinically questionable. And the strategic point here is huge, right? If you're bringing a new drug, especially into a crowded field, the benefit has to be clear. A tiny benefit weighed against cost and complexity often looks like no real benefit to the regulator.
And that dynamic, where even a modest benefit gets crushed if there are safety concerns, that seems almost like the default now. We saw that with NDA 022517 Nocturna, didn't we?
Absolutely. For Nocturna, the benefit, reducing nighttime trips to the bathroom, just didn't clearly outweigh the pretty serious risk of hyponatremia. The metric itself, the number of voids, wasn't enough. It didn't really capture the clinical gain for the patient. And you see similar scrutiny with MyCapsa, NDA 208232. There, the agency questioned where the efficacy was even coming from.
Questioned it how?
They wondered if the positive results were actually due to the drug or if it was just a kind of carryover effect from other pituitary treatments patients had been on before the study started.
Okay, so if the bar for meaningfulness is set that high, how do companies get over it? How do they move beyond just p-values?
Well, the suggestion, consistently, is to really strengthen that benefit argument. Pivot the research focus towards outcomes that matter directly to patients, patient-reported outcomes, or PROs.
Right, PROs.
And validate the results in study designs that are really robust, designs that can truly isolate the drug's long-term impact.
Can you give some concrete examples? What did the agency specifically ask these applicants to do?
Okay, so for Nocturna, the demand was pretty direct. Run a new trial using a validated PRO instrument, something that captures the real, tangible impact of fewer nocturnal voids on a patient's life, not just counting them. Establish that patient-centered meaningfulness.
Makes sense. And for Gepirone ER?
For Gepirone, the agency was, well, blunt. They needed at least one robustly positive short-term trial using the correct formulation. And crucially, they also needed a positive randomized withdrawal study.
A withdrawal study?
Yes, and specifically one where the initial response period, before patients are randomized to stay on the drug or switch to placebo, is at least 6 months long.
Hold on, a 6-month withdrawal study on top of everything else for a product that already has this preponderance of negative studies? That sounds like an enormous gamble for the company, potentially fatal financially.
It's a massive risk, no question. But I think it really underlines the regulatory thinking here. If the historical data is messy or weak, you have to come back with definitive, long-term evidence that the effect is real and sustained. It's sort of the price of entry in that situation.
Wow. Okay. And for my CAPSA, with the carryover concern.
For MyCapsa, they need to do some serious analytical work. Detailed sensitivity analyses, essentially, to mathematically prove that the efficacy they saw in study CHACM01 is truly distinct from any lingering effects of prior therapies. They have to eliminate that potential confusion.
That's a deep dive into clinical evidence. Now, if clinical benefit is the foundation, device safety feels like the critical bridge, doesn't it? Because even a great drug is useless if the delivery system hurts someone. Let's look at combination products and human factors.
Yeah, this is a big one. The recurring weakness here, especially where the drug meets the device, is relying too much on internal assumptions about how the device should work, instead of really validating it with actual users.
So not enough real-world testing?
Exactly. Deficiencies in human factors validation studies, or maybe incomplete risk analysis, these often stop an approval cold. Because if you can't guarantee safe use, especially when a patient or caregiver is using it at home without a healthcare professional looking over their shoulder, it's a non-starter.
And the stakes are high. You mentioned the risk severity scores for NDA 201848, the Melbliss kit.
Precisely. Their own analysis, the FMAA Failure Mode and Effect Analysis, identified something like 30 different ways the device use could go wrong.
30?
30 potential use-related hazards. And many were ranked severity 4 or 5, meaning potential for serious patient harm, things like drug leaks, accidental exposures. But the submission didn't include solid data showing that the fixes they proposed actually worked when tested by representative users.
That sounds like maybe they didn't invest enough in that realistic usability testing early on.
It certainly suggests that. Or look at the OTC epinephrine inhaler, NDA 20592. Comprehension studies showed people just didn't understand critical steps for using it in an emergency, like priming it, cleaning it, or what to do if it got wet.
Which is worrying for an emergency device.
Extremely worrying. If someone can't figure out how to use it under stress, that complexity itself becomes a major safety risk and a regulatory roadblock.
And sometimes the issue is even more basic, like the physical packaging itself creating a hazard. You mentioned NDA 018680, the placement guide?
Yeah, that one was kind of staggering. The instructions, the guide for how to insert the device, was packed inside the sterile packaging.
Inside? So you couldn't read it first?
Exactly. It physically prevents the user from reviewing the critical steps before they start the sterile procedure. You can't open a sterile kit, start the procedure, then realize you're unsure, break sterility to go read the instructions, and then just pick up where you left off. It's a fundamental flaw.
So the suggestion for improvement here has to be about demonstrating that fixes actually work with data.
That's absolutely right. The core suggestion is, implement the necessary design changes, update the labeling, but then you must follow that with comprehensive revalidation. And that validation needs to use a study population that truly represents the intended users, and it has to prove that those high-risk failure modes have genuinely been eliminated or minimized through user-tested solutions.
Okay. Specifically, what did the agency tell these applicants to do to fix these device issues?
All right, for the Melbliss kit, the applicant has to provide hard empirical data. Show us the proof that all the proposed fixes have adequately minimized those 30 high-severity risks they identified. No more assumptions.
Data-driven mitigation.
Exactly. For the progesterone vaginal ring, NDA 201110, the concern was its permanent contact duration. So the agency required acceptable biocompatibility data, specifically detailed studies looking at cytotoxicity, sensitization, genotoxicity, and subacute toxicity. They need proof the material itself is safe for long-term continuous contact.
Makes sense for something staying in the body.
For sure. And for that placement guide issue, the fix was pretty straightforward but essential. Develop a separate, clearer container label to reduce visual clutter, and provide an extra copy of the placement guide outside the sterile packaging. That way, users can review everything before they even think about starting the procedure.
Simple but critical for safety. It's clear that failing to validate user safety is just as much of a showstopper as failing on efficacy. Okay, let's pivot one more time to chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, CMC. This is where the focus gets really technical, ensuring the product is safe and consistent over its whole shelf life.
Right. And a common weakness we see in CMC sections across these letters is a failure to really rigorously nail down and control the product's quality attributes over the long haul.
particularly issues around how the product interacts with its packaging, things like leachables and impurities that might creep up over time. It really boils down to predictability.
Let's talk about that predictability gap, especially with leachables and extractables data. What did you see there?
Well, take Brixadi, NDA 210136. Their evaluation of leachables just wasn't sufficient. They didn't test enough batches, only 1 or 2 instead of the recommended 3, and crucially, they didn't test them at multiple time points throughout the stability study.
Like beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly. Best practice, like in USP 1664, suggests testing at the beginning, middle, and end of the shelf life. By not doing that, they didn't capture the full picture of how leachables might increase over time as the drug sits in its container. So the long-term risk profile was kind of undefined.
And there was also an issue where the predictive tests didn't match reality, right?
Yeah, that was NDA 212854, their initial extractable studies. That's where you deliberately stress the packaging components with harsh conditions to see what could potentially leach out later.
Kind of a worst-case prediction.
Sort of, yeah. But in this case, those aggressive extractable studies failed to identify the very leachables that actually showed up during the real-world long-term stability testing. It suggests their extraction method wasn't aggressive enough. Metaphorically, maybe they used lukewarm water when they needed acid. Their internal test just wasn't predicting the potential real-world quality issues.
We also saw problems with the proposed product specifications themselves, sometimes being too loose, potentially affecting whether patients get the right dose.
Yes, a really critical failure sometimes. Look at BLA 761081, a biosimilar. The proposed lower limit for fill weight rejection was just too low. It was inadequate.
Meaning some vials could be underfilled.
Full 420 milligram dose stated on the label. That opens the door to underdosing. And similarly, in NDA 212904, the company proposed a dissolution acceptance criterion, how quickly the drug dissolves, that their own data didn't actually support. They set a target the product couldn't reliably meet.
So across the board here, the suggestion must be about tightening things up, better analytical methods, stricter specifications?
Absolutely. Develop and validate analytical methods that are super sensitive and specific for detecting potential leachables. And tighten up all those critical quality specifications: fill weight, dissolution, purity. Make sure they align rigorously with what the manufacturing process can actually achieve consistently, and meet safety thresholds, accounting for worst-case scenarios.
What did the agency specifically demand for Brixadi's analytical controls? I find that level of detail interesting.
For Brixadi, they were very specific. They mandated a whole new leachable study. It had to be on at least 3 commercial batches, tested at multiple time points, and they had to establish an AET, an analytical evaluation threshold, capable of detecting any compound leaching out at 1.5 micrograms per day or more.
Wow, 1.5 micrograms. That's sensitive.
It is. And furthermore, any compound detected above 5 micrograms per day required a full toxicological risk assessment. It really shows the granular level of safety oversight they expect for leachables.
Okay, and what about fixing those specification issues?
For NDA 212904, the dissolution issue, they basically had to look at their own data and tighten the acceptance criterion to match what the data actually supported. They couldn't keep the looser, unsupported limit they'd proposed. And for BLA 761081, the fill weight problem, the fix was clear. Tighten that lower rejection limit to ensure every vial can reliably deliver the 420 milligram label claim. Prevent that potential underdosing.
That was a really detailed breakdown. It seems like the common thread across clinical, device, and quality issues is this reliance on internal assumptions rather than rigorous external validation. Is that fair?
I think that's exactly right. We've hit on the need for clinical trials to capture meaningful patient benefit, often using tools like validated PRO instruments. We talked about the absolute necessity of validating design changes with thorough human factor studies to knock down those high-severity risks, and the imperative to get rigorous correlated extractables and leachables data to ensure long-term quality and safety predictability. It's all about proving it, not just assuming it.
Well, remember, improvement is always possible. These critiques point towards actionable solutions. We absolutely invite you to incorporate this feedback and submit your work again for another look. Until next time.